less than, have an affection for he who is greater than, at whose hand we have been blessed. It is he that has made us and not we ourselves. And with a mindset and a mentality that if it had not been for God on our side, that is the impulse that pushes our worship up. And so worship is an act of gratitude, as uninhibited as a dog throwing kisses, licking the hand of his master. When we worship God, we come without reservation, equivocation, or inhibition to come and to show our affection to God. That's why it's antithetical to say I am going to worship. Worship is not a place you go to. Worship is something that you participate in. There are a lot of people who go to where the worship is but never worship. They go to the designated spot at the designated time, but they sit there like the frozen chosen. While somebody is throwing hands up to God saying, I'm glad to be in the service one more time, somebody else is sitting there with their arms folded like I shall not be moved. You ain't worshiping until you start throwing some kisses to God, knowing that you've been blessed by his hand. If nothing else, he woke your nappy head up this morning and started your trifling self on your way. But worship has a double meaning. Not only does it mean to lick, to throw kisses, but it also means to crouch. It conveys the sense of physical posturing in a way that conveys humility. As ancient subject would bow before a king to show respect, to realize that they even approach at the king's behest and permission. We come, as the old folk used to say when I was growing up in Bethlehem Baptist Church, Tacoma, Washington, said, Lord, we come knee bent and head bowed, humbly as we know how. We don't come in here haughty. I may have a designer label on my suit. I may can afford some shoes mama and them could only dream about, but I realize I'm still just a nobody, trying to tell everybody about somebody who can save anybody. So just because I got my weave tightened up don't mean that I got my head stuck up in the air. But I bow my head, I close my eyes, and humble myself before the one who is greater than me. Worship is when I come and I bow down. It is an act of humility and affection. I bow and I kiss. I bow and I lick. I bow and I say thank you. So as Jesus, the risen Lord, appears to his disciples, some at the sighting of him began to lay prostrate before him. Some began to throw kisses to him. Some began to kiss his feet. Some began to crouch before him in acts of humility and affection. They give exuberant and lavish praise on the one whom they have attached their eternal hopes of salvation to. And yet, while some are engaged in the lavish, extravagant acts of worship, there are others sitting there equally blessed by him, equally having eaten from his hand, equally having received the miracles in their lives, equally having seen the demonstration of his power and his love, and they're sitting there doubting. Now, the Greek word that's used there, that's translated in English as doubt, is the Greek word distasio, which means to, the literal meaning is to waver. It gives the picture of a drunken man unsteady in his balance. It conveys the sense of uncertainty, almost like a little kid playing double dutch with the ropes are turning, and now they're waiting for you to jump in, and you keep moving forward and moving back. I got any double dutch alumni in the house? Come on, some of us boys play double dutch too. Boy, I double dutch the heck out of you. Where you're just waiting because you're trying to get the rhythm of the ropes. And you got to get the rhythm right before you jump in so you don't get tangled up in the ropes. Sometimes if you waited too long, they just stop turning. And he conveys the sense of doubt that way, where God is inviting us to come on and jump in. And even though we've been blessed undeniably by God, there are times in our lives where the believers find themselves unwilling, unready, too frightened to jump on in. And I come to tell you today, as we stand here in this hallowed church, this flagship church, at the beginning of your 2011 revival, beginning of a new year, with all your historicity, and in spite of all of our personal testimonies individually and in the aggregate, some have come here today and I have worship in their hearts, and others are sitting here doubting. Paul Tillich says doubt is a part of faith. And nobody who follows Jesus follows him all the way from earth to heaven without having some seasons of doubt, some faith crises along the way. The critical question before us today as we start a new year is, what is it that causes you, as somebody who has been so immeasurably and infinitely blessed by God, to nonetheless find yourself with your feet frozen in a kind of psychoparalysis because you find yourself at a moment of doubt even while others are free to worship? Well, I contend that there's probably three primary reasons and a lot of little reasons. First of all, sometimes believers doubt while others worship because they can't make sense of how God is at work in their life. Sometimes it's an intellectual struggle as we try to wrap our mind around how God is at work in the world and his providential care. You know, in Romans it says that the gospel of Jesus Christ is a stone to the Jews, a stone of stumbling, to the Greek is a rock of offense. And he's talking about both the Jew and the Gentiles' intellectual struggle to get a handle on the gospel. That's what Paul was getting at, that to the Jew, they categorically, in the main, rejected Jesus Christ as their long-awaited Messiah. John said it right. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But to as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the children of God. But his own received him not. Those Jews who followed him were the minority opinion, but the majority opinion was that he was another dime a dozen would-be Messiah, who ultimately found his fate with the tyrannical and brutal power of Rome, subjected him to the cross. To the Greeks, he says that he is a rock of offense. Somehow or another, this proclamation of a dying and resurrecting Savior was irreconcilable with the hard and sophisticated edge of Greek philosophy. That some were just flat out offended at the notion of the resuscitation of a dead corpse. They made the mistake. They confused resurrection with resuscitation. Resuscitation is that order you give to the doctor, that if you should flatline, or if you can only stay here through artificial support, that you either want him to keep pumping you up or at a certain point to unplug the machine. But don't confuse resuscitation with resurrection, because resurrection is what happens when they can no longer resuscitate you by any means. Resuscitation is when they bring you back to this world in the same old body that you've been in all along. Resurrection is when you graduate from this world and are freed and relieved of this world, including this old leaky building. Ultimately, our faith is a resurrection hope that when this tabernacle of this earthen house shall be dissolved, I have another building of God's, when they can no longer resuscitate me anymore. Eternal unto the heavens not made with hands. Everybody in my family suffers with some degree of scoliosis. That's a curvature in the spine. So everybody in my family knows what back pain is. And there are a few things more irritating than back pain. Back pain will rob your sleep. Back pain makes it uncomfortable to drive in the car. Back pain will even make you forget your next point in a sermon. Let me tell you, back pain is a problem. I lived my whole life with back pain because I too have slight scoliosis in my spine. And, resurrection is my promise that I will not always have to live with this back pain. This old body is not fit for an eternal habitation. We're pilgrims and strangers traveling through a foreign land. This world is not our home. And when I get to the other home, I'm going to be in a new body where everything is straight and ain't nothing crooked. Not only people, but not even my spine. But they intellectually were offended. But sometimes folks doubt God not because of any challenges to intellectually grasp the notion of the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, but it is an existential challenge. Somehow or another, their experiences in life in their mind is irreconcilable with the notion of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present God who is loving and kind. Because if God was all-powerful, if God was all-knowing, if God was everywhere all the time at the same time, then tell me, where was God when my child died in infancy? Tell me, where was God when I see young girls having babies under any and all kind of circumstances and abandoning them like it's nothing, and my arms are starved to have a child, and I can't no matter how hard I try. Jeremiah raised it this way: why do the righteous suffer while the wicked grow fat off the land? Where was God when an earthquake shook and took 200,000 lives in Haiti and left the other ones desperate and denigrated in the streets with nowhere to turn? Where was God when a madman decided he was going to start killing people indiscriminately on yesterday? Sometimes experiences we have in life are irreconcilable with others' proclamation that there is a God who cares, when it doesn't seem like God cares, that either God is not, or if he is, but he don't care, as evidenced by what's going on in my life. History is the record of the fact that Winston Churchill, perhaps the greatest political figure of the 20th century, in the latter part of his life, he became increasingly sick, increasingly dependent upon alcohol, and increasingly cynical. And Billy Graham, when he started his crusades, he started them in 1947 out in Los Angeles. And they went so well, he decided that he was going to target the epicenter of the growing secular movement. Secularism is that mentality that we can make sense out of the things of life without referring to God. Secularism in Europe really began with the Enlightenment, with men trying to replace revelation with reason. But secularism picked up speed after 2 world wars that claimed 30 million lives in Europe alone. No mother in Europe went untouched by the carnage that took 30 million of the choicest sons and daughters of Europe. And Winston Churchill, having seen humanity at its worst, seeing the rise of the Third Reich, the killing of 6 million Jews, seeing Europe split between East and West, a bipolar continent, and the rise of the Third Reich and even the threat of a nuclear holocaust, he becomes cynical. When we heard that Billy Graham was coming to London to try and preach the gospel, when many of the ancient cathedrals had been turned into office buildings or museums, he laughed and he mocked him. And he said that Billy Graham, he says, will never make it in London, least of all in the Haringey Theater where he had scheduled his campaigns. And now I got some problems with Billy Graham, because if I could dig him up right now and ask him why didn't he walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with Martin King. I got some problems with Billy Graham. How come he never advocated the 1964 Civil Rights Act or the 1965 Voting Rights Act to the audiences that came every night talking about just as I am? But I heard somebody once say God can make a straight strike with a crooked stick. And when he went to London, he made a straight strike. And in the Haringey Theater, which is the largest outdoor theater in London, it said in the London press that Winston Churchill said that myself and Marilyn Moore together couldn't fill up the Haringey Theater, in mockery. But when Billy Graham came, he not only filled it up once, he not only filled it up twice, but he filled it up night after night for weeks as they came by the thousands and by the 10,000s, giving their life to Christ in what had been considered a death of God's city. Because Samuel DeWitt Proctor was right. It doesn't matter what you put the soul through. God has designed the soul. It's like a compass. No matter where you throw it, it's always going to point north. And I don't care what we go through in life, no matter what tragedy or trial, sooner or later, the soul will always point toward God. Sometimes they just need somebody with boldness and faith to come preaching God. That's why Jesus said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all men unto me, because every man has a soul and it's always pointing toward God. And when those campaigns